Good afternoon. I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving break. Welcome back to Washington. Welcome to Brookings. My name is Bruce Jones. I'm the Vice President and the Director of the Foreign Policy Program here at Brookings. And it's my pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to our event with Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, David Stilwell. And I'm delighted to welcome David to Brookings. David Stilwell was appointed as Assistant Secretary of State by President Donald Trump on the 20th of June, 2019. He had previously served in the Air Force for 35 years, beginning as an enlisted Korean linguist in 1980 and retiring in 2015 as a brigadier general. He was the Asia advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and also served as defense attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Beijing from 2011 to 2013. He's also recently served as the director of the China Strategic Focus Group at U.S. Indo-Pacific Command in Hawaii from 2017 to 2019, where he was also an adjunct senior fellow at the East-West Center. David, thank you for your service to our country and for the important work you're doing now. I think as you can see from his background that David has been at the forefront of managing the policy questions that shape now the future of the U.S.-China relationship, and in fact has been working tirelessly behind the scenes to build effective U.S. policy to China. But he's also very preoccupied in keeping our wider focus on the region as a whole, where we have a huge number of relationships, partners, allies, and interests that go well beyond simply the question of China. Assistant Secretary Stilwell and I, and many others here as well, were together recently at the Mount Fuji Dialogue in Tokyo, where U.S. policymakers and think tankers coming together with their Japanese counterparts to discuss the state of the alliance, but also the question of the shared or not shared perception of the geopolitical challenges that we confront. And unsurprisingly, China was on top of the agenda. David and I were talking earlier in the green room. He was on stage with a number of other actors, people who had served in the Obama administration and the Trump administration. There was a certain amount of friction about the kind of degree of implementation of tactical issues under each administration. But what struck me more than that was, at least from sort of the 30,000-foot perspective, was no real debate about the challenge that China poses to U.S. interests in the region. I suspect that debate is not fully settled in the country. It seems to me that in the strategic community in Washington, there's a kind of strongly consolidated view of the threat that China poses. I don't think it's seen the same way in the financial sector, the technology sector, and other parts of the country as a whole. So I think that debate continues. But this question of how the United States should respond to what is, without any question, a changing role of China, a changing global role of China, is the focus of the project that we're here to continue working on, to continue launching. We read a lot in the press about the trade war with China, about economic and technology questions, but defense and strategic questions are critically important as well, and that's where David has been doing most of his work over recent years. So given his expertise, we could really have nobody better to help us introduce this phase of the Global China Project and the papers that we'll launch today, which really focus on the East Asia region and some of these critical strategic and defense questions in that region, as well as the wider issues. This is one part of a broader project running over 18 months that aims to establish an empirical baseline for understanding and assessing China's global role, which is changing as we speak and expanding as we speak, and to really put Christmas around the question of what role is China playing on the world stage at this point in time. We've published papers on strategic competition, the domestic drivers of influence, and in the coming months we'll have additional papers on great power rivalry, emerging frontier technologies, and the multilateral system. Today, we're going to be focused on East Asia with papers on North Korea, the East and South China Sea, Taiwan, and Southeast Asia. Following the keynote address from Assistant Secretary Stilwell, we'll have a moderated discussion with our research director, Michael Hanlon, and then a panel of the authors of these papers to dive into their research. Before I hand the floor to David, two further notes from me. Brookings discloses the participation of its scholars on political campaigns. Brookings scholars do that work on their own time and off their premises, but it is an important part of our impact strategy. We disclose that on our website. If you go to scholars' bios, you can see their campaign affiliations. As of now, we have scholars advising the Biden, Warren, Harris, and Buttigieg campaigns, and of course we've had scholars on leave serving in the Trump administration. Part of a tradition which has seen a Brookings scholar, Brookings foreign policy scholar, serve in the administration of every president since FDR, Democratic and Republican. Second, I'd like to thank the Ford Foundation for their support of this initiative. I'm very grateful for their support. And David, a particular thank you to you for spending time with us today. Over to you.
Hey, good afternoon. It's great to be here, and it's actually see a lot more friendly faces than I thought. Two I'd like to call out. One, Ryan Haas, who recruited me for this particular duty, which I'm grateful for, and Bob Wong, who's in the back there, who was the DCM in Beijing when I was there, 2011, 2013, and who taught me more about China than I learned before, probably since. So great to see you both, and I hope I don't disappoint, Bob. The topic today is on the idea of pluralism. And, you know, in this job, as I approach this job, I've had to think through, you know, intellectual trappings for what we're doing here, or what I'm trying to accomplish, or what my advice is to the Secretary. And, you know, trying to distill it down into an idea or maybe a single word is fraught with risk, and I look forward to the debate. But, you know, as we think about these things, wrestling with these concepts is just as important, I think, as elucidating them here. So the wrestling for this event was very welcome. Thanks for the opportunity. This discussion today is about the People's Republic of China, but mostly on its impact on the region and our response to the region and the world and those impacts. So I'm going to quickly review policy and then draw out this pluralism theme that comes to mind as we consider this challenge. So first off, policy. I've been fairly public on what that strategy looks like, but just to restate, it's obvious this administration has made long overdue changes to U.S. policy in this region. China is a major consideration of that policy, but so is our relationship with a diverse set of like-minded allies and partners. So 40 years ago, when the PRC began to grow from its ideologically self-imposed isolation and its economic weakness, and now reform and opening at the time, emphasis on opening, required the Chinese Communist Party to adapt to this larger region and world in order to benefit from the benefits of multilateralism. We all understand that it would take some time, but we were encouraged by significant progress in the 1980s. That progress, to me, was best demonstrated at a small dumpling restaurant in Qianmen that in '88 was privately owned. It was one of the very first experimental private it was public-private, but it was a chance to use this human creativity and initiative and the chance to get rich through your own work and you know, sell a product, in this case dumplings. They had one product and one type of dumpling, and that was it. But the beer was cold, the food was good, and the service was outstanding. Compared to the restaurant next door, which is entirely you know, publicly owned or you know, government-owned, where when you walked in, you had to kind of wake up the staff to, you know, serve you and you know, all the results that from there. So the point there is in the 80s, we did see this burgeoning and this new idea and the energy of the Kentucky Fried Chicken on the west side of Tiananmen Square. And I think it gave us all great hope. It certainly did me. So given those initial hopeful signs, our policy for many years was largely premised on a version of the Golden Rule. American officials hoped that by demonstrating the benefits of openness, we would move Beijing onto a more liberal path, which would lead to greater economic and political openness. I don't need to rehash how that turned out, but it is clear that many of our assumptions were wrong. 20 years of empty post-WTO assurances that China will continue to work toward greater openness has triggered an overdue rethink of our approach to the PRC, its ambitions, and then our response. And this administration now is addressing the PRC as it is and not how we wished it would be. What we have seen over the past 2 decades is that liberal reform has slowed and in some cases reversed. As PRC gained greater wealth and power and grew more integrated with the world, it did not converge with that free and open global order as we expected. Instead, the Chinese Communist Party hopes to reshape the international system to become more compatible with its own authoritarian practices. The Trump administration has been clear that, even as our relationship with the PRC is competitive, we do welcome cooperation where our interests align. Competition does not have to lead to confrontation or conflict. We have a deep respect for the Chinese people, and there is a long history of cooperation as trading partners and even as allies in World War II. And that legacy, of course, is what got me interested in this, since I share the name with one of the key players in that. And so our aim is to defend U.S. sovereignty, advance regional interests, and promote a free, open, and rules-based order in Asia and worldwide. So now the recent shift in U.S. perceptions and policy has triggered some questions. So if the responsible stakeholder notion has been overtaken by reality, what replaces it? We know Washington is against aggressive and threatening conduct by Beijing, but what is Washington for? What's our positive statement on all this? In competing with PRC, are we forcing countries to choose? We hear that a lot. So out of this, the word pluralism is not the complete answer to all these questions, of course, but I think it helps frame where we're going with this and captures something essential about what we mean when we talk about divergent visions of world order. In dictionary terms, you can always start with the definition. Pluralism is about coexistence of multiple things, whether states or groups, principles, opinions, or ways of life. In short, it means diversity or openness. My point in diplomatic terms is that America's foreign policy vision, which is rooted in democratic pluralism at home, supports a corresponding pluralism abroad, too, in the Indo-Pacific region and across the world. Both at home and abroad, we support pluralistic systems governed by freedom, rule of law, and respect for the rights of one's neighbors. And just as our vision of pluralism at home is rooted in the sovereign rights of individuals, our vision of pluralism abroad is rooted in the sovereign rights of states. This has been America's vision for generations. Our challenge today, as in the past, is that the appreciation of pluralism is not universal, so we must come to its defense. We have all heard about a new type vision of global governance, which denigrates pluralism, even though the existing system has served the world, and China included, very well in the 7 decades since World War II. So for details, a pluralistic Asia is one in which the region's diverse countries can continue to thrive as they wish. They are secure in their sovereign autonomy. They are free to be themselves, as Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew put it. No hegemonic power dominates or coerces them. In a pluralistic China, countries enjoy, in a pluralistic Asia, countries enjoy open and shared use of the global commons. International waters and airspace belong to all. No one country can convert them into sole possession or zones of exclusion. Pluralism is essential to our vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific, as President Trump said in Da Nang 2 years ago. Countries in the region should remain a diverse constellation of stars, each shining brightly, but none a satellite to any other. It is important to recognize that the region's countries cherish that vision for themselves. We know this, for example, from the recent ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, which emphasizes inclusivity to urge respect for all the region's nations, large and small. We know it from the ASEAN Charter, which calls for upholding the principle of unity in diversity. And we know it from Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific vision. We know it from South Korea's New Southern Policy, India's Act East policy, and Australia's Indo-Pacific concept. These all focus on broadening ties to other nations based on rule of law and respect for sovereignty, with shared access to the commons and shared prosperity. So the U.S. supports pluralism, not just in the Indo-Pacific, but around the globe. After World War II, the United States led the creation of a post-war international order that was pluralistic and free to an unprecedented degree. Following the flawed peace of World War I, the post-World War II system was designed to benefit both victors and vanquished, giving all an equal voice in an international forum. Those arrangements aimed to prevent a new world war by ensuring that peace and prosperity could be shared. As with all human endeavors, these things fall short of perfection, but overall, this idea for the last 7 decades has been a stunning success. As President Trump has said in addressing the United Nations, quote, "It is an eternal credit to the American character that even after we and our allies emerged victorious from the bloodiest war in history, we did not seek territorial expansion or attempt to oppose and impose our way on the lives of others. Instead, we helped build institutions such as this one to defend the sovereignty, security, and prosperity of all." This genuine win-win approach fueled the greatest explosion of prosperity that the world has ever seen. This prosperity spread naturally around the globe to countries that opted to join the world economy. The opportunity was seized. Great powers did not dole it out as some kind of imperial largesse. So our approach reflects a view deeply ingrained in American thinking, that fair play is about genuine win-win arrangements. Everyone can benefit if the rules are obeyed. Life is not necessarily zero-sum, and my being strong and prosperous does not require others to be weak or poor. This is also how we conduct international relations. We don't think we're weaker or poorer just because someone else in the world simply makes money or has power. On the contrary, we think the insights of others can benefit us, that the power of others can make the world a safer place, and that the wealth of others means they'll make things we want to buy and buy the things that we make. Such positive sum synergistic thinking is inherently pluralistic. This is why the U.S. never sought exclusive power in Asia or the world. With the collapse of Soviet communism in 1991, the United States became, at least for a time, the world's only so-called superpower. But we didn't use that position to keep other countries down. On the contrary, we've invested substantially in the growth of other countries, including China and Japan, and India, and others, to bring about greater wealth and prosperity elsewhere, not just here at home. So that is pluralism, or in political science terms, multipolarity. We don't fear or oppose such multipolarity. On the contrary, we've cultivated it. We want other countries to play important roles in world affairs, to respect shared sets of international rules, and to share the burdens of keeping the world safe and secure. The U.S. does not oppose growth in power and prosperity of other countries. We don't view it as a zero-sum matter or a threat. Just ask Deng Xiaoping. As the historian John Pomfret records, when Deng was flying to the U.S. for his historic first visit after normalization in 1979, his foreign minister asked him why he picked the U.S. for his first trip as the leader. Because, Deng said, America's allies are all rich and strong, and if China wanted to be rich and strong, it needed America. And that's a quote. So there's a lesson here, too, about China's own experience with pluralism. As I mentioned earlier, China was on a better trajectory in its era of reform and opening when it moved toward greater pluralism in politics and policy. This is what I witnessed firsthand in that scratchy dumpling shop near Chemen. At that time, many were fond of quoting Deng Xiaoping's very practical idea that it doesn't matter if a cat is black or white so long as it catches mice. It's both realistic and open to several options, right? Or as maybe more fraught, the concept of let 100 flowers bloom. More pluralism and less authoritarianism would be better for the Chinese people, and certainly better for the world. A less authoritarian China would likely be less aggressive overseas. But the increasing authoritarianism is reflected in this new type governance idea in this region and beyond. So from the other perspective, on Beijing's new type governance idea, Chinese officials have spoken for themselves. I think then Foreign Minister Yang Jiechi summed it up well in 2010 at the ASEAN Regional Forum when he declared that China is a big country and you're all small countries, and that's just a fact. For Beijing, international relations is about hierarchy, and big makes right. It's not respectful of pluralism or sovereign autonomy. Inside China, the Communist Party increasingly enforces political, racial, cultural, digital, and ideological homogeneity. As is increasingly apparent in Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and beyond, Chinese idea of governance is enforcement of uniformity. And at the global level, what is China's view of pluralism? Well, consider how it responded when a single NBA executive tweeted an unwelcome opinion about Hong Kong. Clearly, Beijing's campaign to compel ideological conformity doesn't stop at China's borders. And so, to wrap up, there's a choice before us addressing this idea of, don't force us to choose. So I want to address this relationship between pluralism and choice. If a pluralistic world is one in which countries have the freedom to be themselves, that means they have the freedom to make choices. Pluralism and choice go hand in hand. So let's consider the commonly heard concern that countries will be forced to choose between the U.S. and China. I want you to know they won't be forced to make such a choice by us. When we say that America's vision is pluralistic and inclusive, we mean it, and our record shows it. We aspire to friendly relations with Beijing, and we have no objection if other countries similarly strive to deal with Beijing in cooperative and cordial ways. In our foreign relations, though, all countries constantly make choices about policy issues, about economics, trade, sovereignty, security, etc. These choices affect their interests and their well-being. And we encourage our allies and partners to choose prudently in ways that protect their sovereign national interests. Sovereignty means the ability to live free of foreign domination, to live according to one's own laws, and to make one's own decisions. We're not looking to dictate to others, and we want our allies and friends not to be subject to others' dictates. Choosing for sovereignty is important because without it, the freedom to choose at all could be lost. Choices that preserve sovereignty are choices that preserve the future freedom of choice, which we all cherish. A region in which countries maintain their freedom of choice is a pluralistic region and will be a more prosperous and secure one. I'll close by returning to our policy. It has long been America's view that the post-war international system is sufficiently resilient and adaptable, sufficiently pluralistic to accommodate and gladly incorporate a strong and prosperous China that plays by the rules that have served the world so well for the last 70 years. The system is capable of change and has in fact adapted to many ideas and pressures not imagined decades ago. It remains our hope today that Beijing will return to the path of reform and convergence. More respect for pluralism at home and abroad would be a welcome sign. And with that, I'll conclude. Look forward to your questions and to the upcoming interaction. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.